Okay, looks like we are in order. My name is Lynn Fegley. I'm the Administrative Commissioner for the state of Maryland. Happy to serve as your chair. I've had enough Swedish fish at this point to talk very fast. So I think we're going to roll right through this. So the first order, well, first let me just remind everybody that we have James Boyle here to my right, Dr. Katie Drew to my left. To help with today's presentations, we have just one action item, which is FMP review. So I'll be looking for a motion for that toward the end of the meeting. So the first order of business is board consent on the agenda. Does anybody have any suggested changes or modifications to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll consider that approved by consent. And you have the proceedings from the May 2023 meeting in your materials. Are there any edits, modifications, changes? Okay, seeing none, I'll consider that approved by consent. Next on the agenda is public comment. I know we have in our materials one letter from Jeffrey Pierce. I would encourage everybody to read that. Is there any other public comment in the room? Okay, is there anybody online who'd like to make public comment? Okay, all right. And again, I would just encourage everybody to read the letter from the Alewife Harvesters of Maine. There's some really interesting information in there. So moving on from that, we're gonna move right over to Katie Drew is gonna give us a progress update on the river herring benchmark.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So if you recall from our August meeting, we were at the August board meeting about to go into our August assessment workshop for the river herring assessment. And after the conclusion of that workshop at the end of August, the SAS felt that we needed additional time to complete this assessment. That our original schedule was to have the assessment peer reviewed at the end of this year and then presented to the board in February. But based on where we were at the end of August, we felt that was not a reasonable timeline to produce the best product. And so we are pushing the assessment deadline back one meeting cycle so that now the assessment will be peer reviewed in February or March so that it can be presented to the board at the May meeting instead of at the February meeting of next year. So that's the major progress update for that. And we continue to work forward on that. And that seems like, I think right now we're going to make that deadline, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that schedule change or anything else about the assessment if people have questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Dr. Drew on the assessment timeline shift? Okay, nice work. With that, we're going to move on. James is going to give us the FMP review and state compliance. And again, I'll be looking for a motion at the end of this. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly. I know the time crunch. We're going to jump right in. So here's an outline for the presentation. I'm going to start with a short reminder of historical landings over time and then cover the 2022 fishing year specifically. Then I'll move on to some of the monitoring efforts in the compliance reports, including fish passage, stocking efforts, and sturgeon bycatch interactions. And finally, I'll end with a de minimis requests and recommendations from the plan review team. Next slide, please. So first, a very quick reminder of the historical context. This figure shows the trajectories of commercial landings for river herring and American shad since 1950. Starting in the 1970s, the river herring landings fell drastically and then steadily decreased over time. For shad, there has also been a steady decrease in landings over time, which is of course due in part to the moratoria implemented through Amendments 2 and 3. For this next slide, we're just going to zoom in since the 1990s for a better view. So if you look at the landings since 1990, there's more variation for river herring. And for shad, you can see a general downward trend in landings since the 90s. I will note that the river herring number needs to be updated, which I'll get into a little bit shortly. So moving on to 2022. Again, the river herring number needs to be corrected, but this table shows state landings and coastwide totals for commercial shad and river herring, excluding confidential data. For river herring, coastwide commercial landings, including bycatch, totaled about 2.8 million pounds, so correct that. The main number is about 2.6 million pounds for that should be in that table, so that updates the numbers accordingly. The non-confidential bycatch data values increased by 761% from 2021 to 3,865 pounds, although bearing in mind, as we talked about the last FMP review, that only 451 pounds were reported last year. Additionally, Massachusetts reported 27,558 pounds of combined shad and river herring bycatch data from NEFOP. For American shad, the total 2022 commercial landings, directed and bycatch included, reported in compliance reports was 110,027 pounds, which is a 44% decrease from landings in 2021. Bycatch landings of shad also decreased 75% and represent 8% of total landings. Reported hickory shad commercial landings were 98,962 pounds, which is a 0.5% decrease from 2021, although bycatch landings increased by 40%, but they still represent only 3% of total landings. As part of the requirements in Amendments 2 and 3 for river herring and shad, respectively, passage counts are required on select rivers in Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and South Carolina. 4.55 million river herring were counted, which represents a 2.4% increase compared to 2021, and 483,587 shad is a 27% increase compared to 2021. Though I will note that this is still excluding Pennsylvania's passage numbers, as I'll get into shortly. So in 2022, 14.64 million hatchery reared American shad fry were stocked in the Pawcatuck, Nanticoke, Choptank, Patapsco, Potomac, Edisto, and the Santee rivers, which is a 10% decrease from 2021. Maine also continues to participate in trap and transfer stocking of adult pre-spawning airwife of wild origin on the Androscoggin River, although those are not included in the table in the document. For sturgeon interactions in 2022, there were 49 reported interactions with 3 fatalities. However, New Jersey gill netters report the weight of discarded sturgeon rather than the number of individuals, so they reported 653 pounds. Of those 49 interactions, 36 were identified as Atlantic sturgeon and 13 as short nose. Rhode Island also reports NOAA NEFOP data and at-sea monitoring data, which is available after the compliance report deadline, so their data lags by 1 year. So in this compliance report for the 2022 fishing year, they reported 23 actions in 2021, and we will see the 2022 interactions in next year's compliance report in July. For the upcoming fishing year, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida have requested de minimis status for their American shad fisheries, and New Hampshire, Georgia, and Florida request de minimis status for river herring. They all continue to meet the requirements and qualify for de minimis status based on their commercial landings. In evaluating the state compliance reports, the PRT noted some inconsistencies with the requirements in Amendments 2 and 3. First, the PRT did not receive a compliance report from Pennsylvania. Also, similarly to last year, there are just a few long-standing issues that are related to funding and staffing shortages primarily, where states either cannot complete a survey or can take samples but not process them, for example. And there were some other small inconsistencies with the compliance report template, such as not including a copy of the state fishing regulations or a link to the regulations, or a section on hickory shad, which the PRT requests, even if that section is just not applicable for that particular state. With those minor issues, the PRT recommended approval for the compliance reports for 2022. Also, in this year's compliance reports, the PRT requested more detailed information on the sources of bycatch data in response to the last FMP review. And the results showed quite a wide variety of sources, including some states reporting that they had no information available. Therefore, the PRT is recommending the board consider the inconsistency of bycatch reporting sources coast-wide and what its impact is on evaluating bycatch annually. With that information, the action for the board is to consider approval of the 2022 Shad and River Herring FMP review, state compliance reports, and de minimis status for Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Georgia, and Florida. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Any questions on James's presentation? Questions from the board? Okay, seeing none. Does anybody have a motion around this? Anybody? Doug Grab.
I move to approve the Shad and River Herring Fisheries Management Plan Review and State Compliance Report for 2022. And if you'll put up the list of states that requested de minimis, I'll be glad to list those.
I was waiting to see if you were going to be able to remember all that. Good. All right. And is there, while they're getting the motion up, is there a second? All right, Spud Woodward, thank you very much. Okay, we'll wait for the motion to come up.
And de minimis request for Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida for shad, and New Hampshire, Georgia, and Florida for river herring for the 2022 fishing year.
Okay, I think that looks about right. So we have a motion on their board. Is there any discussion about this? Okay, I'm gonna read it into the record real quick. Move to approve the Shad and River Herring Fishery Management Plan Review and State Compliance Reports and de minimis requests from Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida for American shad, and New Hampshire, Georgia, and Florida for river herring for the 2022 fishing year. Motion by Mr. Grout, second by Mr. Woodward. Is there any objection to this motion? All right, seeing none, this motion is approved by consent. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to go right on to other business. Does anybody have any other business to bring before this board? Okay, seeing none, unless there is an objection, I would move to adjourn this meeting. It's been a long day. Thank you, everyone.